Physics video, yeah, been a little while. Lots of stuff to go over, lots of experiments I got to get to doing, and so lots of stuff. So anyway, I have been thinking about polarization actually, and so I just thought I would. This is all I've just thought about it. I haven't finished thinking about it, so I've just begun engaging in a thought process regarding polarization. So I've argued a standard kind of thing that the photons themselves are shaped, and that's why they go through or they don't go through polarization filters. But microwaves sort of reveal that there's got to be something more to the story, because microwaves have a longer wavelength, 3 centimeters, let's say. So it's a pretty good distance. 3 centimeters, something like that, here to here, and that would sort of, and they can create a grating, bars, and block the microwaves by changing the orientation of the bars. So clearly the tons themselves, it wouldn't be relevant. They don't make them 3 centimeters apart, the bars. They make them something much less than that, something maybe the width of this pen actually. And the bars are always kind of thick. They're not as thick as this pen, but they're thicker than thin wires. But the idea would be is they have guns. I don't know whether it shouldn't be necessary to have a specific receiver, in my opinion. They should be easier to receive than they are to transmit, so to speak. Well, anyway, so you transmit the waves, and then you receive the waves, and the idea is you put the polarization filter one orientation or the other orientation, and you can block the microwaves from being received by turning the bars. And this is something I've thought about before, in the sense that I've thought of other ways, other problems that arise with the fact that photons, by my definition, are, it's not so much about the wave, it's about the beginning and end of the wave. What I would say are the tons that define what's seen as a photon. So photons are received by electrons based on the fact that they are a register of impacts. Force at a specific timed interval that is the resonance frequency, let's say, of the particular energy level that the electron's at, and therefore it tips, so to speak. It jumps its location. It does some specific thing that means it's going to release some of the force that's binding it to an atom, or binding it between two electrons. So I've sort of been over this. What I'm claiming photons are created by is the pressure that's created between electrons, or between electrons and neutrons, let's say, inside of atoms. And there's ping pong balls, so to speak, of force. And the closer they are together, the more impacts, the greater the force. The further away things are, the fewer impacts, the less the force. The more ping pong balls, the more force. The less ping pong balls, less force. So there's two components: the volume and the tightness. Anyway, defining what can be created in terms of what will be released. So you can sort of understand that if you push two electrons together and then you release those electrons at an uneven angle, let's say the electron leaves a little crooked, you could see that some of the ping pong balls would be freed. And they could be freed from an initially compressed position. So you push the electron in, it compresses the little ping pong balls. That means they leave at a quicker frequency. And that would be like the creation of an X-ray or something. Anyway, so what I was thinking about the polarization was it might just be more of the problem of these release points not being the same, not being on the same line. So polarization would be out of alignment, because you have to figure that the thing that's releasing them is itself jittering and moving, based on, the heat that it exists in. It's doing the Brownian motion thing. And as it Brownian motions, it's releasing these tons. So it may not release them in perfect alignment. That is, one might be theoretically a little geometrically lower than the other one. And that might be something that these bars would cause, that would interfere with that. So the longer the frequency, the longer the wavelength, the more likely there's a misalignment. And I'd almost argue that with long band radio waves, ones that have meters or hundreds of meters, between the tons, that the receiver, the antenna, isn't even receiving them in alignment. It just doesn't care. It's just that they are always, because it's such a long frequency, it's highly in phase. And it's easy to make it in phase because of the length of the frequency, the wavelength. So there's no phase issue, so it doesn't have to be the same tons hitting things for it to be received as the signal. When you get to light and you get the tighter and tighter frequencies, it's harder and harder to even measure the exact frequency, let alone know that it's perfectly, say everything is in perfect phase, that the timing is perfect. So Piro claims that they do this, and my claim is that I saw it. Look, I can only say what I saw. I can't find the exact documentary, but I saw a documentary on the LIGOS thing, and they were talking to, it's actually a black guy who was in charge of the laser, and he was explaining how they have to constantly work at it to try to get the beam in phase. And yes, lasers by nature are more in phase than incandescent lights or something, but they don't create perfectly in phase light. It's generally in phase, but not perfectly in phase. And the more they need it as perfect as possible for the LIGOS experiment to work. So anyway, because they're measuring these little tiny changes in phase. So anyway, so I was just thinking about the polarizing filter, so you can sort of see that if the bars are this way and there's the tons come in, a little bit different, not exactly on the same exact line, that, one could go through the bars, and the second ton, that would have been the definition of the piece of microwave radiation, won't make it. So only one of the tons goes through. And to me, it's a viable explanation. It also explains what I have noticed, is that you use polarizing filters and all the light is blocked. And what I haven't noticed is anybody doing an experiment to see if all of the radiation is absorbed by the filters. Because it seems to me that they don't get hot. So, doing it with a laser, I should be able to figure some of this out in terms of just deducing from thermal temperatures. Shoot the laser at an absorbing material, see how much of the heat is produced, and then shoot the laser at the polarized film and see how much of the heat is absorbed. Because what I'm going to be kind of arguing here is that the heat can't be absorbed because what's really happening is the tons are being broken, not necessarily the energy being absorbed. So they're just breaking the frequency. It's breaking the relationship from one ton to another. It's not absorbing the energy of the tons themselves. So in a sense, it's scattering. It's scattering them into a form that can't be received, into a signal that no longer has a steady frequency, a detectable frequency. So the radiation is still passing. It's just not passing in a detectable form. So it's kind of like setting your radio dial to a frequency, and then the frequency moves because of variations in the atmosphere or some other thing. The wavelength has been changed and distorted, and you no longer can receive the signal. There's still signal, you just can't receive it because it's the wrong frequency. And I think a similar thing happens defining what polarization can mean. So I'm saying there's probably more levels to polarization, but this level, The stuff that's happening in terms of screening photons based on grid work, that polarization is probably more to do with subtle changes in pitch of how the tons are being released, position. And anything too far out of position can be destroyed with a proper filter. The right filter will wipe out the coherency between the tons because they aren't exactly flying exactly the same trajectory. And then I would still say there's a fundamental polarization that exists of tons themselves, in the sense that they still have the black and red character that define the function of the strong nuclear force and magnetism. So it's not one kind of polarization. There's not one kind of defect or variable that defines filtration. So they're probably going to keep getting called the same thing, but it's not really the same thing. One's an alignment issue, one's polarization. So polarization filters might in the future be appropriately called alignment filters rather than polarization filters. I'm thinking. So anyway, like I said, I haven't thought out all the implications of this yet, because it's a lot to think through. And I'm trying to think of experiments to help do some of this. Like I said, if people have these infrared cameras, this would be a great use for an infrared camera. Is a heat camera, is to see if you can detect how much energy is absorbed when you turn a polarizing filter and block more of the photons, so to speak. Block, quote unquote. Because then what I'm arguing is it's not really getting blocked. They're just getting scattered, so there'll be no absorption of heat. Yeah. They're getting misarranged. Yeah. But see, it's going to be hard to detect, because a non-frequency ton is essentially a graviton, and it can't be detected because we just don't have instruments that can measure that tiny amount of change in gravity. I could argue that the filter is bouncing, reflecting some energy, but I don't know if you could detect the energy being reflected, again, if it isn't reflected at a constant frequency. Which might be the interesting part, is to see if there's any microwave radiation reflecting off of a visible light polarization filter. You could sort of make the argument that if half the frequency is being destroyed by the bars, that might create a new frequency that might be twice the nanometer wavelength of the light that went in. So it'd be interesting to do an experiment to see if you can detect any infrared radiation, redshifted essentially, radiation reflecting off of polarized sunglasses, for example. Be interesting. So anyway, that's just something I've been thinking about. So, like I said, I don't have a conclusion yet. I just have thought on the subject, and not complete yet. But it seems a more viable theory of polarization is alignment, not the structure of the ton. So it's not the shape of the ton, it's the structure, the alignment of the bits that make up the ton. And they can be aligned, they can be misaligned linearly, vertically, or horizontally. So those would be the two kinds of ways you could be off alignment. You can go left to right, or you can go up and down, obviously. So the parts I haven't thought through yet are the parts of how does something misaligned this, up and down, get converted into something misaligned right to left by putting two filters in, converting it first with a halfway filter and then a full so going from horizontal to vertical polarization. Yeah, I just haven't had time to play with that. But that might be a two-slit phenomenon because again we're talking about surfaces and diffraction off of surfaces. So I don't mean off of the surface, I mean the surface influencing the pattern. So you could argue that vertical bars would pass some photons and then some would be pushed sideways. Depending on which side of a bar they passed, they would be deflected by the electrons on the surface, and now they could go in misaligned this way, and now they've been shot this way, that kind of thing. So, but that's a more complex subject that I have to think about some more. Alright, so I guess we'll just do comments for the rest of this. There's a lot of comments and a lot of rudeness and whatever. I'll just, for simplicity, I'll paraphrase my argument here. I guess I don't need to draw anything. I mean, I've drawn it all before. I've done it already with this two-slit stuff and everything else. So, if you don't understand the difference between the two patterns, then I can't help you because it's in previous videos. If you don't want to watch the previous videos, don't watch this video. Don't watch any of them. I mean, really, realistically, you really have to be caught up to what the argument is really about. So there's the two patterns created by the two-slit experiment. The one pattern has just bars. The other pattern is bars, but at different intensities that go to 0. And the bars in the double slit pattern fall inside of the envelope of a single slit width. So what's not known for sure is whether the single slit pattern they fall within the width of is actually the width of the single slits or the combined width of both slits. But they fall inside of that envelope. And the argument is in the double slit experiment that just as you expand the two sides, you eventually get to a point where you evaporate the meaning of the external walls, but you still have the pattern of the double slit interference. The argument is they're both the same thing. Single slit, double slit, it's caused by the same phenomena, the same physical mechanism. There's not something separate called diffraction. Now, I've quoted the MIT professor saying that. If you want to disagree with that, that's fine, but just make sure you say that, yes, I think Professor Lewin is wrong. That's okay. But don't argue with me. I'm just arguing with what conventional physics says is happening. And I think most of them concede that the phenomenon is being created. There's not two separate kinds of pattern. There's an interference pattern. That's the light and dark. And that's what's being discussed. And I just brought up the point, premising this whole thing, that the double slit experiment, the one that they have all the interpretations for, the Copenhagen, the many worlds, and whatever the other ones are, is the experiment that isn't nearly as mysterious, quote unquote, as the single slit. The one that needs interpretations is the single slit, because this is the one where you don't have any convenient problem of figuring out what slit it goes through. You know that the one photon goes through one slit and somehow creates two entities that interfere with each other. That's a lot more complicated than anything happening in the double slit experiment. But anyway, the other subject under contention is the idea of relativity, and I've reduced the argument to the simplest form I can make it. Whereas no matter what we make the scenario, a bus moving half the speed of light and throwing a baseball out the window, or two spacemen tethered to a spaceship moving half the speed of light and they throw a wrench back and forth, the argument being made here is that they're arguing that light behaves just like the wrench in that it carries the momentum. So the photon emitter emits photons that continue to move with the person throwing. So the wrench is thrown by a spaceman He's moving half the speed of light in a perpendicular direction to the direction he throws the wrench. The argument is that we know the wrench is actually moving faster than the back and forth speed. It's moving forward, the momentum of the two astronauts. The astronaut who throws it, the wrench, is moving the same speed as he's moving, and that momentum is real, and it's carried through the space when the wrench is thrown. So even though the astronaut doesn't see the wrench moving 2 speeds, we know the wrench is moving 2 speeds, because when it leaves, when the other astronaut misses it and it flies into space, we know the wrench will have that greater velocity. And the argument is, from my point of view, arguing to these people who defend this theory, is why are photons special? Why can photons move in 2 directions, carry momentum, of their emitter, and yet it doesn't create any increase in speed? Because that, in my opinion, breaks conservation laws. So why are photons different than wrenches? Why, if the photon escapes your frame of your time-dilated frame, why does it not have the same extra velocity that the wrench would have? Okay, and I don't think there's been a rational, fair, reasonable answer to that paradox, as it's stated simply. Alright, so here's some comments. The Mindless Marbles guy is losing it, obviously, and he's just being incredibly rude. He's, oh, my last rude comment. No, it's never his last, and it's just the same, I mean, obnoxiously, it's all you people. You're just, again, I don't bring the rudeness. I mean, you show up here and you're incredibly patronizing and arrogant. You don't respond to the questions asked. You just insult me, and I'm supposed to put up with that bullshit forever. And I'm not putting up with it. This is just, you're just so full of shit. So anyway, so he got into a conversation and said some stuff. I don't know whether he's retracting, he doesn't want to retract, he will retract, I don't know. But he concedes a point to a sense, so I'll read what he has now crossed out. But anyway, that's fair. Look, I concede the point that's to some extent. Yes, it is misleading. Yes. I don't know why popular culture and Yale professors talk about the double-slit experiment when it can be easily explained by the effects caused by the edges. I do think people made a mistake in using Young's double-slit experiment, or the quantum double-slit experiment, whatever that means, as anything monumental. That's not even the full point here. The point is that they've described it and mischaracterized it in pathetically unrealistic ways. So why is this nail-in-the-coffin evidence so vulnerable in the sense that they are so sloppy? I mean, like I said, I've played all these videos, Feynman, all of them, saying, look, I covered one of the slits. Well, yeah, you cover one of the slits, that means you have a single slit experiment. That means you're still going to have a bar pattern. And they drew it as just this, no, it's just going to be a bunch of light spread out, a blob. I mean, it's a grotesque mischaracterization of their own physics. And it goes all the way back to Newton's rings. Again, I mean, they've never fixed that in terms of an explanation. Sorry. So then the part he didn't cross out. In response to that, I provided other setups where there are no edges that could explain the effect as of this comment. So he has these two other, at least two, other experiments. One of them is essentially the same. I mean, it has edges. It is a single slit experiment reflected on a mirror, and to create the second slit, quote unquote. The other one has to do with mirrors at angles, and there's no obvious edges. But again, it's, my argument sort of has been and will be that this is a energy equation. And so what the light is hitting is going to be important, not so much what it goes through, but what it reflects off of. So I'm still going to argue that the effect is a consequence of what happens to the light in the mediums, so to speak, in the places where there is something, not in the places where there is nothing. In a non-field environment, light travels in a straight line, and it doesn't have any potential to interfere with itself. But anyway, I'll get to that. For clarification, it doesn't mean the double slit experiment is meaningless. That's not what I'm saying, considering that all computer simulations of wave mechanics actually reproduce all known results in the physical field of optics, says you. People would have already noticed there was a problem if simulations failed to reproduce any real-life scenario. They obviously don't pay much attention, so I don't think they would notice anything, because they don't seem to notice the obvious, in my opinion. I mean, obvious things like bending space isn't a great way to explain anything. Anyways, I probably lost all my reputation points, so this is likely to be my... so it's likely I'll be blocked or something soon. Yeah, well, you've been invited to leave anytime you like, because you're just an obnoxious troll. I've lost all my patience anyway, likewise. You'll have to find someone else to engage with. There's nothing to engage. You're just a declarator. You just make declarations, and you're going to just keep posting me to 1,000 different experiments to debunk. Like I have nothing better to do with my life, instead of debunking why my solutions aren't solutions. And again, you haven't explained, in my opinion. You keep citing things that, in my opinion, aren't solutions to the problem. But anyway, so he goes on in another comment. I've posted those links to the alternative to the double slit experiment. All those experiments don't have any edges. Well, again, they do. That could explain the interference pattern. It's certainly not obvious, at least, and they should be dealt with. Yeah, you're saying I have this obligation to debunk every single manifestation of the pigeon up your sleeve experiment. Okay, I'll get to it eventually. But I think there's, I think I have more important things. I have different priorities than you do. I've raised why, I've shown how your physicists don't describe the experiment accurately and contradict each other. And in my opinion, that's enough of my job in terms of saying your theories aren't as solid as you claim them to be. Your evidence isn't nail in the coffin. It's weak as shit. And the door should be open to different explanations being considered, rather than this closed door, it's a wave, do the wave math, period. It's not, in my opinion, reasonable under the circumstances. But here's another that doesn't have any obvious edges also. Another. Fine. And frankly, I consider this to be nail in the coffin experiment. Well, just great. Who cares? It's the single photon Mach-Zehnder interferometer experiment. So, I mean, the problem with interferometers, I've already explained, is depending on the position they're in, what you're changing is the length, the distance between, well, I'll show it. I'll link to this one. Yeah, what the hell. Alright, well, let me finish reading what he says on it first. This is a counter experiment to his classical theory. Again, my theory is not classical, so there's no point in keep arguing that this is a classical physics against modern physics or something. Classical physics rejected particle theories, so there's no point in arguing otherwise. They rejected them. I posted the link to it in one of my comments of the previous video. I posted the link to it in one of my comments of the previous video. Okay, it should be obvious where the beam splitters are and where the mirrors are. Oh, okay. Well, again, who cares whether it's obvious or not? But as I have excited and explained, so here we have another one of these setups. So let's understand, this is a beam splitter. So 50% of the light reflects, 50% of the light goes through. Now, as I have pointed out, beam splitters are, there's lots of different kinds, but how most of them are made now, they're half mirrored glass. And the half mirroring means it's a lot of little dots, essentially, with spaces between them, or covered spaces and little clear dots. So you can just imagine that it's essentially a diffraction gradient, which means we know what happens to light when you put it through the 10,000 line experiment. If you take the double slit and make it the 10,000 slit experiment, we know what happens to the light. It's spread and pixelated into dots, into a geometry. And so it's spread is the key word. It's spread. Alright? So this reflected light is not spread. The light that goes through is spread. So this light is coned. It's spreading as it goes to this mirror, and it's spreading, continues to spread as it gets to this point. So this light didn't spread at all, little tiny dot. This light spread a lot, and now it's a big dot, and a big dot in a even more confused environment where there could be multiple dots that aren't even going to hit the mirrors anymore. And so what you're measuring through the light that goes through is spread light. The light that goes through this way is beamed light. The light that reflects here is spread light. Okay, and the light that reflects here is beamed light. So you're mixing, these two mixtures are the same thing of two uneven patterns. This is not the same light. The light that took this path is not the same as the light that took this path. And I think I've demonstrated that as being logically impossible. I could show you the old MIT laser experiments where they're turning the dot on and off, by pressing on the table and changing the length of the interferometer. And I could show you where there's little glimpses that you get it when he puts the card in front, and when he's doing certain things, you can see that one of the dots is 3/4 the size of the other dot. Well, I mean, less than three, a little more than half as much bigger. So they're obviously, one is spread, a much bigger Newton's ring pattern than the other one is. And I'd argue that's consequential, significant. It's a significant variable that you're not accounting for, or creating explanation for, or clarification, or anything. So, where's the consideration in this theory of yours? So I'll read some of this. I just don't know if I want to get into the details of this particular experiment. When you send photons one by one, which is tricky to do, most of them go out path 2, let's say. Well, no, it's by percentages, 50-50, so I don't know why you say most. But anyway, now remove the mirror B. Clearly half as many photons will get to the second beam splitter. However, those that will have 50-50 chance of going through 1 or 2. Place the removed mirror back. Now you get twice as many photons, but most of them go through path 2, including the ones that went through the other mirror. We didn't see anything result-wise, so we don't have any idea what this experiment produces. Now, the experiment that I linked to in the previous video did something else. So you get this, you get no explanation of exactly, there's no measurements or results in that image he gives you. And so what, we're supposed to understand what the analysis is. And now he's going to switch to another experiment. As they vary the positions, the paths where most photons came into change from 2 to 1 to 2 and so on. And so the question is now, how does the presence of one mirror at a distance affect the photons that go through the other mirror? Well, the point is you're creating a pattern with the light that goes through the grating, the diffraction grating, and the light that doesn't have a pattern. So one is Newton's ring essentially, and one is not. It's like putting an aperture in the path in one of the paths and no aperture in the other path. The two forms of photonic radiation are not the same. The beam splitter does not do as the word describes, evenly split the light. It changes the light. Alright, let's see if there's anything else on this lousy little thread. About the double slit, please explain the effects caused by the edges. Now you've gone full retard. Let's see. Okay, so he's quoting Nikki, I guess. About the double slit, when it can be easily explained by the effects caused by the edges. Okay, so now he's quoting the comment he didn't like. Now you've gone full retard, oh boy. Addy fucking os to this channel and the people that inhabit it. Well, yeah, Doc, I'd like you to get the hell out of here. You're just a rude, obnoxious piece of shit. Fuck, I knew somebody would say that. I edited my post specifically for that ahead of time. So now he's just, he's crossed out a post. I mean, no, sorry, he's crossed out his own post. Because I guess he doesn't stand by what he said or something, but whatever, doesn't matter. If you don't agree about the non-importance of the double slit experiment, then just open about any QM book and you'll find that almost none of them even mention it. I don't think that's true. It's only the variations on them that are important, and Amendum doesn't even talk about them. I mean, it's the most famous. It's cited as the nail in the coffin historical experiment. Now fine, you want to say that all these much more complex experiments are the real proof, and I've already made this argument. If they can't accurately describe the function of the simplest experiments and you want me to trust them on the more complex experiments, I've already explained how polarization may not create 50-50 results, in the sense that if I use the frisbee analogy, if I throw a frisbee through the bars in a jail cell, okay, all the frisbees going horizontally won't go through. But some of the ones going the right way also won't go through because they'll hit the bar. Even though they're going the right way, they're going to hit the bar. So you don't get a 50-50 filter. And I've just explained how a beam splitter isn't an innocuous, uncomplicated, with clear and certain byproducts. It does have byproduct, and it can't be just assumed to be innocuous in the experiment. As if it's producing no effect, that's not causing the end effect. And all of that analysis doesn't exist in your physics books, and it doesn't exist in the physics lectures. And this is supposed to be, again, you're asserting a truth. You're asserting this is the best answer. It's complete enough. We don't have to. Again, the very fact that you would bother with this nail in the coffin stuff means that you want to say, okay, it's waves. You're done considering anything else. And obviously, I'm going to defend the fact that no, you haven't proven it. You don't have enough evidence. And I think the something else is going to be a more rational explanation, because waves require a medium, and mediums are fundamentally going to be more complex than the thing traveling through them. It's true about sound, it's true about all this stuff. And I don't think the physical universe works that way. That's essentially, in my opinion, a God theory. If you're going to claim complex mediums, I'm going to say that sounds like religion. Alright, mindless again. Yeah, I get what you mean. He wants his circumference of ignorance to be as small as possible, whatever that means. Wink. No, but seriously, I just understand that before I have No, but seriously, I understood that before, and I have to say this. His entire career, well, now he's talking about who, I don't know, culminated to the point where he thinks he can get away with dismissing everything without even understanding what others are saying. Whatever that means. And this is exactly what led him down the path to reject SR, then E and M, I don't know what that is, and then classical optics, then Galileo. After all, the only evidence is that we drank our tea on trains. So again, he says that there was evidence from Galileo defending the fact that light obeys or is bent by bent time. You know, that this general relativity thing, that there are special relativity, there was any evidence gathered for the theories of relativity in Galileo's time that was any more sophisticated than, well, it seems that way, that with these big material objects, if we give them velocity, that you know, I can throw a baseball back and forth. Well, I'm pointing out what you see in big objects at slow speeds doesn't necessarily have anything to do with little objects at high speeds. Anyway, and so on. I was actually going to explain all this, but I don't want to write so much. Really, do you think we bend the light any way we want? Question mark. I don't know who he's quoting. Or that we make up the Heisenberg principle? Yeah, I think you do. The Heisenberg principle is just made up. yeah, it is. Yeah, in the sense that you just sit there and took something where we can't measure it, and you just said, well, we can't measure it because it's unmeasurable. Instead of saying we just don't have a ruler, we can't measure things that small, no, we're just going to say it's not measurable. It doesn't have a reality. It's amorphous. It's whatever. Has he ever gave any accurate explanation of what any of the physics says? I played the physics professor's videos, so I don't know exactly what you mean by this comment. I mean, all I'm arguing with is your theories. The ones you say are the truth. This was never a reasonable discussion to begin with. Well, I think because you never had a reasonable explanation for beyond how light could ever get across a spaceship moving half the speed of light, perpendicular, that it could never do that unless it went there instantaneously. Frankly, there's no other way for it to do it reasonably. So I think you're unreasonable on the face of it, because you're not accepting the fact that you have to make something change for you to do something that's fundamentally impossible, which is make light go someplace that's already left where it was. Do you think he knows just a modicum of QM formalism? Well, of course I only know a modicum of it. You know, I don't do Einstein field equations, because the wave-particle duality and the double-slit experiment is not a mystery. Well, they seem to think it's a mystery enough where they invent entire new universes, 12 of them, to explain it. So fuck you on the face of that nonsense. It's really not. Granted, any remaining semblance of mystery is shifted to interpretations of QM. You're claiming a photon is broken in some fundamental way, creates two things that somehow interfere with each other, and then the photon lands as an infinitesimally small, isolated quanta of energy. That's your theory. I mean, on its face, I'm saying that's a God theory. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. My argument is you don't even have ordinary evidence. When he talks about SR, whatever he says is really, really, really dumb. Okay, yeah, I'm the dumbass because I'm saying if a target's moving away from you and you have to get to it, the only way you can get to it is to go the longer distance of where it's moved away from you, and you have to do it really fast. because it's still moving away every second. Shit. Anyway, it's not a mystery. It's really not. Granted, any remaining semblance of mystery is shifted to interpretations of QM. Well, again, you don't want to take responsibility for your interpretations. Your interpretations are fundamental to your mechanics. So if you don't have a mechanics, then you're just making God statements about how the Lord works in mysterious ways. When he talks about SR, whatever he says is really, really, really dumb. Okay, I'm not kidding. Yeah, and like I said, I think your explanation, whatever it is, for why light doesn't do what the wrench does, is going to be something called really, really dumb. It's so sad that he can get away with saying that the time dilation factor, or who knows what, is just an inverted gravity well. I'm saying that the factor has the same curve. There's more time dilation the closer you get to the speed of light. And just as gravity increases, the closer you get to the mass. It's the same curve. You're saying it's not? Go ahead and say it's not. That's okay with me. But that's all it is, fundamentally. Let's see. I've been watching 50 plus videos of this like a retard. Whatever. When I said he's an example of a Dunning-Kruger effect, I'm not kidding. So again, you're just making the same, just stupid, immature insults. Typical troll material. You can go ahead and say it. I could just say the same thing. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. It seems to me you have a little bit of knowledge, you become a devotee of it, glued to it, stuck to it, and you won't concede that the evidence is weak. You just keep saying, no, it's solid, it's strong, it's really good. And no, it's not. It's not conclusive. You haven't proven your case. The only other person that's this untalkable, whatever, is side 10, whatever it is, Bullen indicate. Anyway, go find any. There's lots of kooks in the world, so whatever. You want to throw me in the category, fine. I just don't give a shit. Again, you're this unaccountable troll who just makes these comments and you don't put anything on the line. All right. You say his theory is airtight, but how about he drives the final structure constant or the G2 constant? He derives the fine structure constant or the G2 constant. So he wants me to see. I could say there was a constant amount of you could say even in the polarization argument that there would be a constant you could figure for the number of photons you throw, how many will actually hit the bars that are moving vertically, and you can come up with a number for that. So in any system there's leakage. So I could argue that the wrench in the moving example, we know it does this whole Pythagorean bullshit in terms of the two speeds combine into much less than the two speeds added up. So you don't get to go if I'm going 50 miles an hour this way and I'm going 100 miles an hour this way, I don't get to go 150 miles an hour somewhere. Okay, it's going to be some number less than that. And those would be constants that you could equate, that those relationships are always going to have some kind of pi or some other kind of relationship. And so apparently he wants me to derive certain ones of those constants or explain their existence. I don't have, and again, you don't have. If you have a model, I don't have to derive them, because I can just give you the physical model and say, no matter which way you turn this triangle, you could take the angle of one triangle and I could move it anywhere I want, and it's still going to come out to the same 360 degrees. That kind of thing. All right. Another comment. I don't know who he's commenting to. They're just one after another. I don't know. I'm just really tired. Again, I'm not going to be posting, although I might reply to others. Well, he does post, as far as I can tell, and not to others, and it's another gratuitously insulting pile of crap. Yeah, and if he wants to get rid of all the mystery, how about he try to attack mathematics? So again, these people are going to argue that their mathematical models, which I've already described to be somewhat inaccurate, approximation models, not accurate models, that will fall apart if I push them, like in the two-slit experiment. I make the slits wide enough, the mathematics will fail to adjust to that. There's plenty of open, interesting problems out there. I'd love to see him go there. Well, again, I don't have much faith in doing anything mathematically except understanding that it's all in the end geometry. So basically, I mean, vectors are geometry, and vectors can quite nicely approximate the function of momentum. And so that's all there is in this whole thing. There's just mass and momentums, mass and velocities, and that turns into force. Alright, so he's quoting somebody. Oh, Russell Bernard. Who cares? Mathematically, rightly viewed, possesses not only the truth, but supreme beauty. And this isn't subjective mush. A beauty cold and austere, like that of a sculpture. Something exactly the opposite of mathematical in most respects. Without appeal to any part of our weaker nature, without generous tappings of painting or music, yet sublimely pure and capable of a stern perfection, such as only the greatest art can show. 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, whatever. Again, I'm not against math, but a lot of math doesn't do any of that. It doesn't have any of that precision. They're almost grotesque approximations, and your formulas are completely dependent on you recognizing what variables exist, and that's why they often put in constants and then later on figured out, whoops, that was a mistake, we should have put in a factor, not a constant. And I'm not talking about fractals or inverting gravity wells. I'm talking about Galileo's theory, algebraic number theory, whatever that means, cardinal arithmetic. Did you know some infinities are bigger than others? Well, that's just too cute. That's been established wisdom in the mathematical community for the last 50 years so far. Well, again, I should be impressed by that you're able to sit there and do double infinity in your mathematics, and I should find that impressive. I think that's the opposite of an impressive argument. So, yeah, fuck that. Let's see, so Mindless Marbles is now trying to make friends with the doc, so he says, okay, I was wrong. I decided to go do something that was very, very obvious and something I should have done long, long ago. I took a laser and cut out 2 slits in a piece of paper. The slits were about half a millimeter wide, and I initially wrote 0.75 millimeter, but it was a mismeasurement, and they were 1.1 millimeters apart, so twice as wide a impediment as width of the slits. This is the setup I tried to achieve. So again, I have to do this undotting of his crap. So it's not his setup, it's somebody else's. Real life images if you want. Real life images that you took of what you did? I doubt it. Now they're on some other website. I can't. Well, we'll see. He puts 2. He writes out the word dot, and so you have to take the dots out. I mean, other people seem to be able to post links. Maybe you should try. This is really annoying. Extracting your stupid dot. I mean, I could just retype it, I suppose, but it's not a very unpronounceable website, i.immature.com. Gibberish. Oh, gee, well, that's not a real good picture of the... yeah, sorry, that wasn't very useful. So he has a laser taped to a book shining at a piece of paper. I imagine it's his slits, and then I suppose there's a screen somewhere. Okay. Paper slits are a real problem because of the amount of edges you get on them. It almost looks like, yeah, I don't know. So I guess this is what he's calling his blocking piece of paper. So here's his slits imagined. And this is his block that he's going to put here and block half the pattern. So many problems with that, so I'll go into that. But, you know, it's worth trying, but I'm just saying there's inevitable problems in being able to get any results that you can draw any conclusions based on. The entire point was to place the thing that blocks one of the slits at a distance too far away for whatever scales Immature thinks his interactions take place at. So he's just basically saying that, look, I say the light is actually doing some kind of waving thing, and it needs to wave all the way across the distance. So if I have the target 4 meters away, the light photons need to mix all of that distance. And if I do anything to interfere with their mixing, I'll ruin the pattern, because they're doing real mixing. They're really acting like water waves. And they're really in the medium, and they're really mixing as they go all the way across. They're not mixing, their radar is mixing. Their photon radar. Or that's Copenhagen, you know. The many worlding mixing. Anyway, alright, the entire point was to place the thing that blocks one of the slits at a distance too far away for whatever scales Immature says the interaction takes place at. Namely, the blocking paper was about 1.5 centimeters away from the slits. Well, the image looked further away than that, but whatever. I didn't think it was possible to do this, but I got it to block only one of the slits. Well, theoretically, functionally, there's no way to do this in one sense. If you think of the two-slit experiment, the majority of the light, even in the two-slit experiment, goes right through both the slits, goes straight and hits the target. That's why the center maxima is so bright. It's because the majority of the light doesn't get affected. The photons go perfectly straight and hit the target. And you can sort of find that out by putting a slit right in front of the target, and you'll see, oh yeah, I can make a laser beam right there. It goes right through. Obviously those photons are moving straight. So anyway, obviously he would reject that theory, I guess. I mean, he'd think they have to wave their way to, but they don't have to wave their way to. Again, like I said, I can put another aperture. I can have the two-slit experiment. I can put another aperture in front of it, a hole, and I'll still have plenty of light to make a pattern with. Clearly, you know, blocking out all the other stuff, the center is still very bright. Anyway, let's see, but I got to block one of the slits. So again, blocking one of the slits kind of, like I said, theoretically, the light's bending both ways, so you can't really block the slit without going further than the slit. If the light's being spread from both slits, you can kind of understand that all you can do is block half the cone without going way past the two slits to block the entire cone created by one of the slits. It's not really possible. Alright, the entire point, well anyway, I look at one of my walls without the blocker, and then two with the blocker. I can confirm. Okay, so I'm going to redo his experiment just to see what I see and what I can confirm. That I actually saw the extra double slit interference pattern. Now see, whatever he says the extra double slit interference pattern is, he thinks, I guess, diffraction isn't bars. when it is. I don't know what he thinks. The extra double slit interference pattern. The extra double slit interference pattern is the bars inside the single slit envelope. That's the only extra. The only thing the double slit has is a change in the position of the bars. Okay, the central maxima is smaller. That's the only difference between the single slit and the double slit, is that the odd, even, if you want to call it, or on-off pattern is changed because of the thickness of the center bar. The center bar is 3 thick in the single slit and only 2 thick, or 1 thick in the double slit. So the odd-even thing is off in the two patterns, so to speak. The on-off pattern is out of different, and it has a different phase. And the only other difference is the envelope. Okay, so I don't know what you mean when you say, I actually saw the extra double slit interference pattern. If and only if both slits were unblocked. When both slits were unblocked, I saw tiny dark lines. So again, so he's saying the dark lines are the double slit experiment, when the facts are, if you have a slit that's a 1/2 millimeter wide, you'll get plenty of pattern from a single slit. Lots of bars. 1/2 millimeter is plenty wide enough to get lots of bars in the single slit. So he's saying, I saw tiny dark lines. So he's saying that the tiny dark lines are the double slit. Well, I don't understand. If he could take a picture of the experiment, or maybe he's taking a picture of somebody else, I don't understand. So it wasn't a picture of your experiment? It's a picture of somebody else's experiment? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I mean, why not show me the results? When I placed the blocker, those dark lines went away. So again, that doesn't make any sense. So if you block one slit, and you still have one slit open, okay, and it's a 1/2 millimeter thick, there's rules about how many bars you get with a 1/2 millimeter opening, and the rule is you get plenty. When I placed the blocker, they went away. When I unblock one of the slits, the tiny dark lines come back. So when I unblock one of the slits, what does that mean? You mean the one you blocked? Or do you mean you blocked both the slits and then the pattern went away? Well, yeah, if they block both of them, the pattern goes away. We'll probably both be able to agree on the no slit experiment producing no pattern. So we might agree on one thing in the universe. So not only is this poorly written, but it's not even sourced at all. No photographs of any actual results. Just your testimony. Thank you very much. And your testimony is not even coherent to the argument being made, which is the single slit experiment does create bar pattern, and the fact that you didn't see it means that somehow you not only broke the